Can we just give 2 or 3 more minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
ಅಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಇವಾಗ.
Rupa, we can start 3:36.
Can we start, sir?
Yeah.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to each one of you. On behalf of Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, welcome you all for this exclusive webinar on decoding BRSR. This subject would be, the deliberations would be on a comprehensive guide to ESG reporting and the recent updates. I'm Rupa, Assistant Secretary General at Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce. The webinar is organized under the aegis of the Chamber's ESG Expert Committee, chaired by Mr. V.C. Mohan, who is the Senior General Manager, EHS Management at Bosch, and co-chaired by Mr. Rajesh Jha, who is the Country Environment and Sustainability Manager at ABB India. The Chamber acknowledges the support of Mr. Ravitesh Hegde, CEO, Paryavarnit Engineers and Consultants. Thank you, Mr. Hegde, for accepting our invitation to address at this exclusive webinar. And he is also joined by his team member, Mr. Amol. Welcome, sir. Welcome for the webinar. who would be addressing along with Mr. Ravitej Hegde. We also have with us Mr. Mohan, who chairs the expert committee. Welcome, sir. Welcome for the. And the chamber acknowledges its support to all the annual sponsors for their immense contribution to the activities of the chamber throughout the year. Now I would like to hand over the stage to Mr. Mohan. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Rupa, for setting context for this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Hegde for, accepting this request from the chamber side, and with his experience, he has agreed to share his experience and knowledge on BRSR. As you know, business responsibility and sustainability reporting is something the SEBI through Government of India has taken up so that the entire value chain within the manufacturing would be more responsible in terms of environmental protection, in terms of sustainability, social aspects, and the governance aspects. In fact, being in Bosch, one of the top within top 100 listed companies in India, we were one of the organizations who are in the front for reporting. We have done already 2 reportings for financial years 22-23 and 23-24, and we are already working for reporting for 24-25. So the experience is that it is evolving, and it has a lot of challenges. This is where today's webinar would help industries to understand it better and helps them in reporting. It is not that only large industries have to have the competency and the know-how to report, because it's a value chain, and already this year top 250 listed companies would have reported on their scope 3 emissions on the BRSR core. But it is good that the government has deferred this reporting by 1 more year, because a lot of preparation is required. Immense amount of data needs to be captured, and then the right quality of data, and then it has to be reported. And with report, as we know, for companies already there is a requirement of reasonable assurance, where we had the experience that the reasonable assurance takes a very deep dive into the data, the source of the data, and various things. So it takes some time since it's a new requirement, but such webinars support industries to understand better, seek clarifications, and this is how, as an industry, we can work together. As you know, in the area of sustainability, there is no competitors. It's all for the good of Mother Earth and good of all the living beings on the earth, and this is where we can collaborate, coordinate, and support each other, so that in the end manufacturing comes with I would say very low impact on the environment, better social aspects, and the governance aspects. So I think entire team is keen to hear from Mr. Hegde first, and then Hegde, my suggestion is please give some time, keep some time in the end, because I am sure there will be a lot of questions coming up, clarifications, and this interaction will improve the maturity of all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind words and setting the context. We are happy to presenting this presentation on the decoding of BRSR, a comprehensive guide, and also an update on the recent updates on the BRSR front. It has happened at the context has been. So we thank BCIC for giving us the opportunity to present this session on the BRSR. And also we would be keeping a question and answer session at the end of the event to clarify the doubts and the queries that the audience might be having. And also we would like to put upon one more thing, is that since the audience that we are seeing in this in the participant list varies from different sectors and different backgrounds, we decided to take from the basics of the BRSR and come to the recent changes and the recent updates at the end of the presentation. Having said that, since we have the very, with the time constraint, we might not be able to cover all the parts of the BRSR and BRSR sections in depth. So in case of any queries, we will be happy to address it at the end of the session and also offline after the sessions as well. With this, we would like to start the session without wasting any time. But before starting, I would like to give a brief background of what is the flow that we are going to follow in the presentation. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is the overall flow of the presentation that we have. Initially, we'll be just explaining about our background and what is our exposure to the BRSR and other aspects. And then we will be explaining about ESG and the business case of ESG for the industries, for the participants who has preliminary exposure on the ESG front and also the business case of it. Then we will be deep diving on the Indian regulatory scenario, starting from how the regulatory requirements with respect to the disclosure related to the sustainability has evolved over the years and how we have arrived at the BRSR at the current stage. And then we will be explaining briefly about the BRSR structure and the requirements. What are the legal obligations that the listed entities have in line with the BRSR requirements? And then I will be updating on the recent updates in BRSR, which has been released by SEBI in the month of December in 2024. And then we'll touch upon step-by-step guide for the BRSR readiness for the organizations who are starting their BRSR journey for now. So this is going to be the brief content of our presentation today. And going forward with the first part of the topic, I would request my colleague Amod, who heads the ESG in our organization, to present briefly about our organization, and then we can take it forward. Thank you. Over to you,
Amod. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are from Paryavaran Engineers and Consultants Private Limited. We are here in the market for the past about 8 years, and we have a very good team of environmental experts, around 10 people, and we have a total workforce of more than 150 people spread across southern part of India. We are happy to serve many customers across different sectors, and we have many major companies as our customers. Among those, we have 50 plus delighted customers. We are also having and dealing with the treatment plants, their operation, maintenance, monitoring. So right now, we are almost treating around 15,000 meter cube of wastewater per day. We are serving or giving our services to 18 different sectors, and especially this ESG services. Right now, it is just on the rise, and we are having services to all these 18 sectors. There are 4 distinct services which we mainly offer from our organization. We would be seeing that in the following slides. So if you see, these are our main different 4 services which we are providing from Paryavaran Engineers and Consultants. So as of now, as I already told you, we are involved in the maintenance, monitoring, operation of treatment plants, whether water, wastewater, or even sometimes sewage treatment plants. We have a automated treatment plant operation with technology which is known as IO-Treat, and we have installed this at around 20 plus locations already, and this is working successfully. We do take care of O&M of all these treatment plants. I already mentioned you. So water audits, and again, all different kind of audits, even it is environmental audits, so that is covered under other services. But however, we do give those services. Coming to the second bucket, which is the environmental compliance. So we do help in getting many different kinds of environmental compliance for different companies. whether it is from PCB or any other governmental organizations or anywhere. So we do help in those things too. Other than that, we also have services in the field of ESG and climate advisory. So this is what is the core topic for today is. So here we do see in sustainability, when it comes to ESG, there are different things. For example, making the assessments is somewhat is the basic, from baseline assessments to risk assessments, then prioritizing it, reporting it. So all these, in all these things, we would be with you, and we do give services in all these areas. Other than the climate action is also one of the area where we give services. As I already told you, environmental audits, water audits, legal audits, or even environmental awareness trainings, or any kind of trainings related to environmental sector, we do give those services. However, we do have waste management advisory, and we have supply chain audits also. So this is our core team. Arjun R is the chairman and MD, and also the founder of this PEC. Mr. Hegde, Ravitesh Hegde is here along with me today. He is the CEO of company and ESG expert. I'm among RC, director of ESG in PEC. Prasad sir, he is also a director. He is in the core team. Raghu H is also a director in our PEC. Next slide. So ESG services that we provide, we can classify it into three main divisions. If we see the first one, it is basically sustainability strategy and confirmation. So in this, all the baseline assessments are done. Whether it is gap assessments, materiality assessments, all these services are provided. Again, based on these services, we do develop ESG policies, metrics, and then you all know these things. We do develop strategic plans to go ahead in this route. Other than that, there is also risk assessment services which we do provide. Supply chain sustainability. So there are many recent updates, as already Ravitesh Hegde told. There are many recent updates in this line. He will be elaborating on this in the upcoming slides. There are many green branding strategies we can help you in, and also ESG training is also another field which we focus on. Other than that, we are also we do also help companies in sustainability reporting and ratings, and especially reporting could be based on many different standards framework. It could be GRI, IARC, BRSR. So we do help in reporting according to these frameworks. We also rating assistance. We also help in applying for some awards, and maybe especially CIA awards. And then maybe if you are really deserving, and you do even get it. So we do prepare for those things. Climate action advisory, if we see that, especially the greenhouse gases inventarization is one of the services. Science-based targets, commitments, so helping those targets. Internal carbon pricing advisory, life cycle assessments, net zero strategies. Net zero is something which is coming up very strongly right now these days. Also, carbon credit sourcing and registrations is also another service which we do provide in this area. So now Ravitesh Hegde will be taking over the presentation, and we will be continuing.
Yeah, thank you. So we will be proceeding with the main part of the session. So I'll be starting with the. So basically, in order to understand why this term of ESG is getting evolved over the years, I think this slide would give one perception or give an input on why this ESG is important for the business survival in the days to come. So this chart that you are seeing over the the presentation is the business risk list, which is listed by World Economic Forum for the year of 23-24. If you see the major business risks that the businesses are going to face in the days to come, among that, in the next 10 years, it is going to be environmental aspects which are going to be pertaining more risk to the business rather than the economic or the technological aspects which are there. So if you see over the past few years, there is a setting trend that the environmental and social issues are becoming the major threats for the businesses, for the survival of the businesses in many sectors. So this gives an input to the businesses that the entire ESG is important in terms of managing the business with the sustainability in view. On to the next slide. So we'll try to understand why this ESG is so important for the business, or why do we have to do the ESG in terms of reporting. If we see that what is the business case behind the ESG, the basic reason why the ESG has to be done, or it is inevitable for the companies, is that there's a lot of aspects which are connected to the ESG aspects are directly connected to the aspects which are related to the valuations of the company. Whenever, if you see the valuations of the stocks of the companies who are performing well in terms of their ESG, they are performing well in the valuations as well. So there is a direct correlation between the valuations of the stocks as well as the valuation of the ESG scores. So if you see the reports which has been published by various forums, there is a direct correlation has been made in between the ESG scores or ESG performance to the stock valuations. And moving to the next, it is not only about the stock valuation, it is also about the, can we move to the next slide, please? So it also provides the competitive advantage, like the firms which are implementing better ESG strategies are going to have a competitive advantage because of the price premiums that they are going to get, cost savings that they are going to achieve by implementing the ESG strategies, the resource efficiencies that are going to be achieved because of the implementation of the strategies which are in line with the environment as well as the raw material preservation. And the valuation premiums are, as I explained in the previous slide, there is a direct correlation between the valuation as well as the ESG scores or the ESG performance. These are all the aspects which give a competitive advantage for the companies which are performing well in terms of ESG, and for over the companies which are not so well performing in terms of ESG. We move to the next slide, please. So also it is easier for the organizations to have the access to the capital if they are performing well over in the ESG front. So if we have seen, there are various news events that we come across on a daily basis, that the ESG financing itself has become a major area of interest. There are various banks which are offering the ESG funds. There are various mutual funds which are offering the ESG funds for the customers. So there is a direct funds which are associated with the ESG, which are making it easier for the organizations who have a higher ESG ratings and higher ESG performance to get the capital on an easy basis. And also, as it is also linked to the legal requirement for the listed entities, it is an inevitable part that the ESG, the ESG journey has to be taken up by the organizations who would like to be listed in the national stock exchanges. Moving to the next slide. So, and also it addresses the risk of because ultimately, what is ESG? ESG is a tool which minimizes the risk and increases the opportunity. So if we are performing well in the ESG, basically we are also mitigating the risk. And also, since climate risk is an integral part of the ESG risk management, so if an organization is performing well in terms of managing its risk, it basically eliminates its risks and it becomes an added advantage for the organizations. Moving to the next slide, please. And also there are very credible studies which has given an output saying that it also attracts and retains the talents. So there was a study which was conducted by a reputed organization where it is indicated that the employees are willing to work more at the organizations who are performing well, who perceive them, or who make the people perceive that they are very responsible in terms of their business conduct. So with all these benefits, it is not only good to do the task for the organization to go with the ESG journey, but it is one of the must to do task for the organizations to follow the ESG. Next slide. So since we were just going through the queries that that the attendees had requested, what they want to know during the session, many of them had asked for understanding what is the journey that an organization has to follow in terms of implementing the ESG. So even though it is bit out of the topic of BRSR, we thought that we should be covering this topic where we should be explaining what is ESG and what should be the implementation strategy or the journey for the organizations to achieve a stage, to reach a stage where they can their ESG can work as a standalone strategy. So initially, if an organization want to start their ESG journey, they should start with understanding their stakeholder requirements. So ultimately, the task of a sustainability manager of an organization is to create a value in terms of for its stakeholders. So if the intent is to create the value for the stakeholders, the first and foremost thing is to understand what is the value that a stakeholder is expecting from the company. So basically, there is a structured way in which the assessment is conducted to understand the expectation of the stakeholders and the prioritize the aspects which are important for the organizations to follow. So that is called materiality assessment. Organizations has to start with the materiality assessment to understand what is important for their stakeholders and also what is important for its business, and then develop the strategies and the policies in line with the aspects which are categorized as high priority issues for their stakeholders. So once you develop the policies, internally a mechanism has to be developed in the form of a sustainability task force where you can develop a team of multi functions where people from the different functions can work together to achieve work towards the material aspects. And also there can be the sustainability metrics can be developed for the organizations where to address each of the material aspect there can be certain metrics which can be assigned and the targets and the baselines can be assessed for this particular metrics. Once these targets have been set, the action plan and strategies can be developed in line with each of the KPIs or the metrics that is being developed, and then the driving of the action should take place. And then we continue with the PDCA cycle and start reporting it to the stakeholders so that we close loop it to the stakeholder where the issues that the stakeholder has raised as important to the stakeholder, we have to report back to him on what is the performance that we have in terms of those aspects which the stakeholder perceives as important for the organization. And then we have to continuously keep ourselves benchmarking and stepping up. So this is the entire journey or the step-by-step approach that an organization can follow in terms of implementing their ESG journey. Moving to the next slide. So then now we will be coming to the major part of today's discussion where we will be explaining what are the regulatory requirements that the Indian firms has to have in terms of the ESG and how we have arrived at a stage where the BRSR is as it is today. So if we trace back the aspects of ESG in the Indian regulations, it is not very new. Even our very constitution has very many clauses or the sections which specifically talks about the well-being of the people, well-being of the environment, protecting the human rights of the people, and the very intent of the many sections of the constitution itself addresses the issues of ESG. And when it comes to the organizations or guiding the organizations to follow their ESG journey, the origin of this regulations comes from the Companies Act. There are sections in the Companies Act which talk, even though the topic of ESG or the word ESG or sustainability was not even existent or not even prevalent at the time of Companies Act, the releasing of the Companies Act, there are certain aspects or certain intents has been put forward by the Act where it directly impacts the environment, social and governance performance of the organizations. If we go through it in details, the Companies Act section 134 talks about conservation of energy to be reported in the board report, which is one of the major part of the board report, where the board has to submit the initiatives that it has taken to conserve the energy, and it has to submit it to the MCE. And also there are sections in the Companies Act where at least one woman director is suggested to be present in the board of directors as part of this section, which we call as DIE in the terms of ESG as on today, had already been present as a requirement to be present in the Companies Act system. And also, if there are sections where it is specifically mentioned that the organization has to work towards the well-being of its employees, stakeholders, shareholders, community, as well as safeguarding the environment, which covers the broader aspect of all the ESG aspects, which we talk about the ESG today. So all these things were a part of Companies Act ever since the Companies Act has been formed in India. Can you move to the next slide? So after the journey, the actual journey of ESG in the current form or in the form of the sustainability that we talk in today's terms has started in 2008 when S&P ESG India Index was released by the CRISIL. This was one of the first investable index for India. Basically, before 2008, there was no index which was specifically for India, which was addressing the ESG performance of the organizations, which can be referred by the investors to invest in the organizations who are performing well in ESG forms. So this was the origin of the ESG journey for the India, even though this was not a regulatory bounded or a mandatory requirement for the organizations, but the journey had started since 2008 when the S&P ESG India Index was released. And then in 2009, there was a NVG or National Voluntary Guidelines was released by the MCE. These were the guidelines which was developed by the government to guide the organizations to work towards the social, environmental, and economic responsibilities, and to establish a uniform framework for the organizations to follow in order to achieve the ESG excellence in their working strategies. And in 2012, the first time there was a regulation which had evolved and which was released by SEBI. It was called Business Responsibility Report. In 2012, this report was published. This requirement had been onboarded, and there were 100 listed entities were mandated to report their performance under BRR. And then BRR was also extended to 500 listed entities in 2015. And in 2016, SEBI had released a guideline called Green Bond Guideline. Interestingly, India is the second country after China globally to provide the national level guideline on green bonding. So this is very less known fact that even the India or the SEBI as on date has the green bond guidelines, which is one of its unique in its framework and its development methodology. And in 2017, there was SEBI also suggested top 500 companies to follow integrated reporting. It was a suggestion, or it was a voluntary suggestion, voluntary basis. Organizations who are listed in the BSE and NSE were advised to report under integrated reporting guidelines. And in 2019, NGRBC or National Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct was released by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And this National Guideline for Responsible Business Conduct is the foundation for the BRSR that we have as on today. And also in 2020, there was a committee was formed under MCA to propose a format for the business responsibility and sustainability reporting. In fact, it was the platform by which the word BRSR was first coined, and the BRSR, as in the form of today, started to evolve from this committee's recommendations. And in 2021, SEBI released the BRSR. So this is the entire journey of regulatory landscape in terms of ESG disclosures in India. Moving to the next slide. So as you had seen in the previous slide, initially the legal requirement for the disclosures in terms of ESG started with business responsibility report, whereas in 2020 it has been evolved to the what we call today as BRSR or business responsibility and sustainability report. So there were various changes which have been made in the way in which the sustainability performance has been reported by the organizations, while the evolution happened from BRR and BRSR. Initially, there were BRR had 5 sections where the organization was supposed to report on various aspects related to general information, financial details, other details, BR information, and principle-wise performance. Whereas when we move to the BRSR, there are 3 sections under which we report, and we will be explaining it further in the coming slides. And there was a single format which has been advised in the BRR. It was called it was one of the universal single format called BRR format, which was available when we had the BRR. Now there are two levels of reporting or disclosures that the organization can make. One is called essential indicator, and the second one is called leadership indicators. So essential is the one which organizations has to, or the eligible, the mandated organization has to report mandatorily, whereas the leadership indicators are for the organizations which has evolved over in the BRSR journey. And there were only 59 questions in the BRR, and it has increased to 140 questions in BRSR. And mostly it was qualitative questions which were asked or which were disclosed in the BRR. And in terms of when we see the BRSR questionnaire, it includes both qualitative and quantitative questions. And also, initially the disclosure requirement under the BRR regime was only under the annual report. The organization was supposed to report it as part of its annual report, but now it is also mandatory to upload it in the NCA 21 portal along with the annual reporting. So this is the way in which it has been evolved from the BRR to BRSR. And moving to the structure of BRSR. So if we go with the BRSR is basically designed to address 9 principles under the voluntary guidelines which have been developed. So there are 9 principles. The principle 1, which talks about the business conduct and the manner in which the ethical, transparent, and accountable businesses has to run. And principle 2 talks about the business that has to be, it should be sustainable and safe in terms of its goods and services. And principle 3 talks about the well-being of the employees, including the value chain employees. And principle 4 talks about the interest of the, it should respect the interest of the stakeholders. And what we call as material aspects in terms of ESG. And principle 5 talks about the human rights. And principle 6, which has many of the important indicators to be reported. It talks about the environmental restoration and the protection. Principle 7 talks about the regulatory policies and the regulatory compliances and also the transparency. And principle 8 talks about the inclusive growth and equitable development. And finally, the 9th principle talks about the customer responsibility or the downstream responsibility that the organization has to have. These are the 9 principles upon which the BRSR has been built. If you have to go in depth in terms of mapping each of the ESG principles to the aspects of the sustainability, there are key aspects which are addressed under each one of these principles, and each principles are mapped with certain indicators and aspects. We can move to the next slide. So BRSR has 3 sections of reporting. The first section is called general disclosure. It talks about the detailed questions related to the organizational context and the background. Basically, this is the part where we can understand the context of the organization and to understand the basic principles and the holdings and the way in which the business models of the organization has been developed. And the section B talks about the management and process disclosures. This is the section under which the management's perception or the management's mechanism as well as the governance and leadership oversight in terms of to achieve the ESG performance in line with 9 principles is explained in this section. There are specific questions which addresses the aspect of policy, management process, governance, and leadership related aspects. And the third one is called principle-wise performance disclosure, where there are indicators where it is split into 2 type of indicators. One called essential indicator, which is mandatory to be reported for the organizations who come under the umbrella of BRSR requirement. And it requires it includes the data of performance data of energy, emissions, waste, and when it comes to the human resource, there are various aspects which has to be reported under these sections. And also the aspects related to the governance also has to be a part of this part of the disclosure. And also the final one is called the leadership indicator. This is a voluntary to be reported, and it is good to be reported for the organizations who has already evolved in the journey of BRSR. And this asks about the aspects related to LCA, related to the conflict management policy, and the breakup of energy policy and other aspects. And initially, when the BRSR was released and also was proposed by the MCA committee, it proposed two sections or two separate checklists for the BRSR reporting, where there was a BRSR Lite which has been developed to specifically help out the organizations which are unlisted or which are in the preliminary stage of their evolution in the BRSR journey to follow, which are very basic questionnaires and the disclosures that the organization can start with, and then they can move to the BRSR comprehensive, which is also a mandatory requirement for the organizations which fall under the BRSR umbrella. So this is the part where the organization, where SEBI and the MCA had specifically developed the standards which can be helping, which addresses the disclosure requirement for the organizations which are unlisted and the smaller companies, and also for the organization and the organizations which are listed and the larger organizations. So basically, this can be used for the organizations who are in the starting journey of their BRSR. Moving to the next slide, please. So in terms of compliance obligation, since there is a gliding path that the SEBI has suggested to, or SEBI has mandated for the organization to follow. And starting with, it was mandated for the top 150 listed entities under the BSE and NSE to start the BRSR co-reporting under this requirement. And top 150 entities were supposed to report it starting from 23-24, FY 23-24. And it has moved to, it was increased to top 250 listed entities in 24-25. And also for the top 500 companies in the 25-26 and for the top 1,000 companies in 26-27. So this categorization of the listed entities were by the virtue of their market capitalization, these compliance obligations were mandated for the organizations. Moving to the next slide, please. Now we will come to the recent updates which has been formulated in the last month. There are various changes in various relaxations which were given by SEBI and with various clarifications on certain unclear aspects which were present earlier in the BRSR guideline earlier. So there were various requirements which were resulted in various ambiguities and various uncertainties which has been cleared off in the notification in the meeting which was held in December 18th of the 2024. And one of the major changes which has been made is earlier it was mandated that core reasonable assurance. The reasonable assurance is a level of assurance which requires the organization to be establishing a robust data management system to ensure that they clear the reasonable assurance. So, and this was mandated from FY 23-24 for top 150 companies, eventually covering up to 1,000 companies by 26-27. This was a mandate where, as per the previous requirement of the BRSR. This has been revised currently to replace the word reasonable assurance to the assurance or assessments. So basically, there is a new word or new terminology which has been introduced in the regulation called assessment. So assessments standards has to be developed by ISF or Industry Standards Forum, which is yet to be developed as of now. It is not yet developed, and it will be starting or it will be applicable from the FY 24-25. It means that the upcoming report that the organizations are about to disclose, they have to, instead of the mandatory reasonable assurance, they can also choose to have the third-party assurance or assessment. and the term reasonable assurance has been replaced with assurance and assessments. This is a relaxation for the organizations, to be precise, because as reasonable assurance requires a stringent data management requirements to be followed by the organizations. Clear that. And it was very difficult for the organizations who are starting their reporting journey in the and who are at the initial stages of their reporting journey. And as ISF has not yet published the assessment standards, I believe that in the FY 24-25, it is expected to be that the organization might follow the assurance standards itself. Having said that, in the years subsequent to that, people might move forward for the assessment standards be developed by ISF in the days to come. So this is one of the major change which has happened in terms of BRSR, which has published in the last. And moving to the next slide, please. And also there was a requirement which there was no guidance document on the disclosure against the BRSR was available for the industry specific requirements. So basically there was a gap of standardization of reporting in terms of various aspects which was supposed to be reported under the BRSR. And under the revised requirements, there is SEBI and ISF has released a guidance document on December 20th, which has standardized most of the ambiguities, or which was cleared of most of the ambiguities which were there in the there earlier, and there were a lot of issues with the uniformities between the organizations which were present because of the non-standard or deferred standards that the people were following in terms of reporting to that disclosures. So this has been resolved by releasing a standalone guidance document for the industries. And this has standardized the organizations, and also it also has mandated, or the organization has to retune the data management practices or data calculation practices based on these guidelines. So the organizations who were reporting their performance in terms of various other methods of calculation has to follow these methods for the calculation and the disclosure of their performance in henceforth. And coming to the next slide, there was one more part that has been included. There was no part where there's a regulation on the green credit system, which is going to be released for the India as well. And there was no part of the sections where the disclosures on the green credit was mandated earlier. And now there has been one more leadership indicator has been introduced under Principle 6, where the green credit generated and procured by the listed entities and its 10 value chain partners has to be reported. Top 10 value chain partners has to be disclosed in report. So basically what it requires for organization has to do is that whatever the green credits that they generate, sell or purchase has to be can be reported as it is. It falls under the leadership indicator. It can be an organization can choose to report these things in the public domain, and also data of green credit generated by the supply chain partners need also be tracked to report it to the public domain. Going to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, and also there was one more major indicators. There were certain relaxations which were also made in terms of the disclosure requirements. Value chain disclosures were mandated. Earlier, it was mandated that top 250 entities in the listed entities were supposed to start their value chain disclosures starting from FY 24-25. That means to say that in the running financial year, they were supposed to report the value chain disclosures, and value chain disclosures should cover the top upstream and downstream partners cumulatively covering 75% of its purchases and sales, and limited assurance should be followed from the FY 25-26. These were the three requirements which were there in terms of the value chain reporting. So there is a relaxation which has been offered by SEBI with these changes. Value chain disclosures were made voluntary and deferred to 25-26. So the mandatory requirement which was supposed to be done on the value chain would be starting for the top 250 companies from FY 25-26. And value chain disclosures earlier were supposed to be on the cumulatively 75% of its upstream and downstream purchases and sales. Whereas now there is one more point which is added where individually comprising 2% or more entities under the sales and purchase. Basically, if an entity contributes to 2% of sales or 2% of the purchase for an organization, for the mother organization, for a listed organization, then they have to start disclosing the ESG performance of those value chain partners. And limited assurance is postponed for one more financial year. And also previous year reporting is not mandated for the first year. So basically, if an organization is starting for the value chain reporting from coming financial year, they need not to report it for the previous financial year. Whereas earlier it was not very clear whether they have to do the reporting for the previous financial years or not. So the implications of it is that now many organizations who have already worked on that, mapping their value chain partners who are supposed to follow their ESG, they have to rework on to filter the organizations or filter the value chain partners who contribute to 2% or more individually for their sales and the purchases. And also they can there is certain relaxation on reporting in the financial year 24-25. So this can be availed by the organizations who fall under the umbrella of BRSR. Moving to the next slide. So to summarize, this is the overall changes which has been made in the update which has been issued in December 18th. So there is a relaxation from the the mandatory filing has been pushed from the for the value chain reporting. It has been pushed from FY 24-25 for the top 250 to from 25-26, and also there has been an aspect of limited assurance has been replaced with the assessment or assurance, and also value chain assurance or assessment also has been postponed to FY 26-27. So these are the summary of the changes which has been made under the last update which has happened in the BRSR. Moving to the next slide, and there are some under the industry standards which has been released for the BRSR reporting. There are certain certain nomenclature or calculation methodologies has been specified, which are very important to be understood for the entities who want to report their performance in the public domain. There's an aspect called intensity-based calculation or purchasing power parity calculations were introduced, where if there is an organization who is operating in various countries or which has the the revenue where the revenues cannot be it is operating at various places and the revenue is also different in terms of different currencies. This has to be normalized with the purchasing power parity, where there has been a specific calculation which has been developed by the which has been suggested by the ISF to follow to make sure that there is a uniformity in terms of the calculation, and it is mandated for the application for the ESG footprint, water footprint, energy footprint, and embracing circularity aspects, where it has to be reported in terms of the intensity-based calculation, specifically in terms of the revenue-based intensity or the production-based intensity. So this is one of the major aspects which has been introduced in the industry standards. Next slide, please. And there is one more aspect called output-based intensity has been introduced, where the industries where the organization has to report their footprint, or they have to report their water or energy footprints, they have to report also in terms of their output-based intensity, and also when it is and the methodology for the manufacturing and for the service sector has been also elaborated in the standards, which has made it very uniform for all the organization to follow, and it will be very easier for the organization to follow in terms of their performance. Next slide. And there is one more terminology which has been introduced called a spend-based approach. One of the major difficulties that the organization were facing in terms of reporting their energy consumption as well as for their emissions is that lack of primary data availability. There are a lot of smaller organizations which fall under the supply chain of the larger organization or the listed entities who fall under the umbrella of BRSR, who doesn't have the resources in place to measure the primary data. So in such cases, how the data has to be calculated, or how the carbon dioxide emissions or or any emissions in that sense, or the energy consumption has been reported. There has been a concept called spend-based approach has been introduced. In this, since all the organizations will inevitably maintain the data of the revenue that they spend on the electricity as well as the purchases, so that can be used to estimate the quantity of the primary consumption that happens with respect to the activity, and that can be used to calculate the energy consumption or the emissions. So this is a relaxation that has been given by ISF in calculation of the energy emissions as well, energy consumption as well as the emissions. Going to the next slide, please. Going to the last part of the session. So if there is an organization which is at a stage where it is starting its journey for the BRSR reporting, so this is the path that it can follow to make sure that it copes up with the requirement of the legal requirement as of today, and also has an internal mechanism to address the upcoming regulation also. So it starts with the basic, the organization, it is willing to start its BRSR or any disclosure journey. The first thing that it can start with is to start with the baseline study and do the gap assessment to understand what is the gap and what has to be done, and also to benchmark with the peers, and then align its policies and the strategies with the BRSR principles, and develop the processes, targets, and action plan in line with the BRSR principles. And then it can start the data management system, because this is one of the most difficult part or most challenging aspect of a public disclosure. So most of the organizations fail in disclosing the credible data because they don't have a robust data management system. And standardization of data management practice is a must do for any organization who is willing to publish its data in the public domain, leave aside BRSR or even the sustainability report. If a data is to be published in its website on the ESG front, then it is very much mandatory to make sure that the data that is published in the public domain is very credible. In order to do that, it is very much required for the organization to set up the robust data management system. There are various tools which are available as on date, which including the most of the ERP softwares nowadays also have ESG data management portals, and there are a lot of tools which are in the market, including the one which we serve. And in terms of deploying the tools, it is important that if an organization has various operational locations as well as the manufacturing locations, it is important that the calculations and the data management happens at each of the sites in the precise manner as it is required to be. And the post having the data in place, next thing that the organization has to do is engage with its stakeholders, because as it is a mandatory aspect for the organizations to follow or work with its value chain partners as part of the legal requirements. It is important that if there is a value chain partner who doesn't have the enough resources to manage the ESG journey, then I think the responsibility of handholding the VC partners lies with the mother organizations. And also there are various tools nowadays available to grasp the data from the supply chain partners as well. And the final part of this journey is the reporting and disclosure. It might look like the reporting and disclosure is an easy job, collecting various data and presenting it in a form where you can just publish the data. But it is not about publishing any data. It is about publishing the credible data. So the journey that the organizations has to follow in terms of developing an internal system to make sure that there is a robust data or credible data that it manages, and it drives the betterment measures or drives the performance of the organization in terms of ESG is important before we start even disclosing in the public domain. So it is very important for the organization to follow this step-by-step approach in order to make sure that there is a consistent reporting that is done by the organizations. With this, I think we'll move to the next slide. So with this, I think we will be I'll be handing over to Rupam. I think if you can let us know if there is any queries, we would be happy to resolve queries that you might be having.
Yes, thank you. There is one query that they wanted to know if companies listed in other countries but have big in India are required to submit BRSR, big business.
Okay. No, as on date, there is no requirement for the organization who are not listed in India to be reporting under the BRSR framework. Basically, BRSR is not a standalone act. It's a part of an act called LODR, listing obligations and disclosure regulations, which is specifically applicable for only for the entities who are listed in the organization. So since it forms a part of the LODR, so and the LODR is not applicable for the organization who are not listed in India. So it is not mandatory for the organization who are not listed in India to publish the BRSR, or it is not mandatory to publish the BRSR. And the organization can choose to, definitely they can choose to report under BRSR at any stage. I think there is a question.
There is one more question.
Materiality aspects.
Yes.
So if we have to explain in detail on the materiality assessment, so see any sustainability frameworks or any ESG framework, there is one basic aspect with respect to the sustainability or any framework, that is stakeholder centeredness. So if you see the very concept of ESG is there because to address the risk in the entire for entire stakeholders. It is not only important to manage the risks by the organization, the internal risk by the organization, but also to make sure that the concerns of all the stakeholder is grasped by the organization very precisely, and also the organization has to address these aspects which are important for the stakeholders. And if you see that if the very intent of the existence of an organization is to create the value for its stakeholders, as it is not only the value with respect to its economic performance, but also with respect to various social interventions and creating the value across for all the stakeholders. So the first step that is important for us is the aspect which starts with the aspect of understanding the stakeholder expectation. So there are various standards by which we can assess the expectation of the stakeholders. There are specific standards, global standards, which are available to start to understand and grasp the requirement of the stakeholders and to address them. And now there is one more terminology called double materiality, which is also being followed by most of the organizations, and it is also a mandatory for the organizations who are working in EU countries to follow the double materiality. So basic intent of this is it also undergoes a step of screening out the critical stakeholders, and then we approach the stakeholders to understand their concerns, and then we segregate it in terms of prioritize it in terms of its impact that it is creating and impact that it is going to create. So these are the things that we would be, this is about the materiality assessment. So we would be loving to explain it to you in further also if required in detail. So I think the aspect on the offline discussion that we can have on this. And is there any certification available for ESG? There are. It's not exactly the certification, but there is something called rankings. There are various ranking organizations who rank the organizations on their ESG performance. That can be, I mean, if I'm understanding your question properly, if you want to understand where do you stand as on sustainability or ESG journey, so rating is the one which the organization can participate and to understand where do they stand and also understand where is the gap. And in terms of ESG, there are various awards and recognitions which are based on certain frameworks, which organization can follow to understand or gauge themselves in terms of in line with their peers, where do they stand. So, and there is a question on typical timeline of ESG implementation journey if the organization is starting from scratch. It depends on various aspects because the organization, because ESG journey is ultimately dependent on the organizational readiness. many of the organizations that we had recently visited one of the organizations in Mysore, where the organization is already matured in terms of various aspects that it has in terms of ESG, even though they don't have, they specifically not have aligned themselves in the ESG regulations per se, but they already have all the aspects which was supposed to be followed for a best ESG journey. So it is clear for the organization like such to implement the ESG in a very short time span. Whereas if the organization is starting from scratch in the sense that there is no policy, there is no procedure, it might take certain amount of the resources, and since it is to be explored case by case basis, there is no such standalone answer on this particular question that we can talk about. And could you please explain carbon credit registration? I think the carbon credit, there are various terms, or there are various exchanges where the carbon or carbon credits are traded, which can be sourced from there, and which can be, which you can purchase and use for your offset. And there are different kind of credits also, which we can explain of the this discussion, because this particular topic is out of today's discussion area. I would request that we will be coming back to you on the on offline on this particular point of discussion. How can PCB manufacturers? There's a question that how can PCB manufacturers effectively integrate ESG consideration into their corporate governance structure, especially in the areas like risk management and supply chain transparency? Definitely, I mean the PCB. Leave aside the PCB manufacturing, or for as far as any sectors, the procedure that they have to follow in terms of their corporate governance structure and the risk management is more or less the same. The mechanism or the skeleton of the overall mechanism remains the same for any sector. It is completely sector agnostic. Ultimately, the way in which the strategies, what makes it different for the sectors is that when you come to the stage of developing the strategies and the roadmap, there are different strategies and the roadmaps that the organization has to follow based on the sectors. But in terms of the corporate governance structure and the risk management, there's absolutely, it is sector agnostic, and you can have the same structure that the other peers are doing in the other sectors can be followed, or it can be benchmarked upon. And there is a question called, is BRSR light mandatory as on today, or what time? What is the timeline? No, it is not mandatory. It is BRSR light is not mandatory. And I think
there is one more question. What should be the approach of non-listed entities towards BRSR?
Okay, this is a very good question. Since if you see the timeline that the SEBI has as on date set forward, is that it is going to cover top 1,000 listed entities by in the next 3 years, right? So once, and also it is mandatory for these listed entities to start, their value chain disclosures very near to. It is not very far that the organization, the top 1,000 entities will start pushing their ESG policies to the supply chain or the major players of the supply chain. And there is all possibility that the SEBI or even the MCA or any organization, any regulator might extend this to all the organizations. There's all possibilities of extending this for a larger footprint. So it is very much important even for the non-listed entities to start the BRSR journey today, because it will be, as it is going to be a legal requirement when it comes. So it is very difficult for the organization to immediately start grasping those data, or if you are not ready for the BRSR 3 years down the line, it is not an immediate job for an organization to start collecting the data and start reporting, because it requires an internal mechanism to manage the data, internal mechanism to drive the performance in terms of ESG. So it is very important for even for the non-listed entities to start working on the ESG journey, even if not for the ESG, if not for the BRSR, but for the ESG, other benefits that the ESG offers, the smaller and unlisted entities are also suggested to go with the BRSR.
I'm not sure whether this was answered. What are the biggest challenges business will face to net zero emission?
Again, this comes with the sector to sector specific challenges. There are hard to abate sectors, like if you go with the steel, cement, and refineries. These organizations have different challenges, and the service sector has different challenges. So, I mean, it is very difficult to generalize on the challenges that the organization are going to face. But if you have to, I mean, if I have to stand back and have a look into the issues that the organization are going to face when it comes to the ESG, is that, I mean, net neutrality, is that most of the organizations who claim to be near neutral now are in the or have already achieved the neutral, have achieved with the help of the carbon credits. And it is not suggestible to go with the carbon credits at the initial stage to offset your emissions. And this is not going to achieve the global, goals of achieving the, reduction in the global temperature. So what is recommended for the organization is to follow is to first attempt for the efficiency in terms of the resource consumption and the utility consumption to start with, and then explore for the technological interventions in terms of reduction of the emissions, and then whatever the residual emission which is very difficult to abate for, that is the one which the organization can go with the credits and offset those. And the second thing, that the challenges, if we have to be precise on the challenges that the organization are facing, there are certain aspects which is very difficult to abate, right? So, for example, if we are in the coal-based economy, if we see most of the thermal power plant in India is done by the coal, or even the steel that we generate is manufactured with the coal and coal. So it is very difficult to replace. There's no technology it is available at the scale to eliminate these.
exit door different है ना exit door accessories वो सब
Yeah, so as it is, there are certain aspects which are difficult to be abated in different sectors, and it is very difficult for us to address. And the second thing with the challenges is the scope 3 emission. If organization want to be net neutral in terms of the value chain, then that requires a different level of interventions by the organizations. Even the organizations who are reporting their ESG reports, they are mostly reporting scope 1 and 2, and the scope 3 is something which many of the organizations are not even accounting as on date. So the challenges that we are going to face with respect to scope 3 abatement is yet to be consolidated by the organization. So the abatement of scope 3 emissions is a challenge. And finally, in India, most of the logistics as on date runs with the fossil fuels. And even though if you address the manufacturing emissions, it requires a whole lot of government interventions in terms of reduction as a sector. So if you see the transportation sector and the energy sector, if the whole sector performs well, even individual organizations perform well. So it requires, and the challenges which are faced are, as I mentioned, they are varying from sector to sector.
So there is one more question. It's clear that BRSR is only for top 1,000 listed companies, whereas ESG reporting is voluntary. So want to know how to maintain checks on the company's performance if they are not part of the list in the next cycle.
So as on date, there is nothing, since there is no mandatory guidelines which has to be done, but the organization, if you want to gauge yourself on where do you stand, you can always participate in the ESG rating systems or participating in the ESG ratings. That will be giving a better understanding on where you stand. There are various ratings which are available, like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, CDPs, Bloomberg, Sustainalytics. So you can participate in the ESG voluntary, participations in the rating agencies, and you can gauge yourself. And EcoVadis, definitely there was a question on EcoVadis, which also can be, implemented in terms of to achieve in terms of gauge yourself on where do you stand in terms of your ESG journey. That is for the companies who doesn't fall under the umbrella of ESG BRSR requirements.
There is one question on the requirement of specific legal, any specific legal requirement?
In terms of BRSR is a legal requirement, but apart from for the non-listed entities, there is no such legal requirement for the disclosure process. Is there any accredited institution for one to be qualified on ESG? Are there any levels? If so, can you explain? If this is as an organization, there is nothing, no accreditation institution for now, as far as we understand. See that the accreditation for the ESG is there's nothing as such. See, ESG is a vast topic, so there are even within ESG there are various roles that different organizations play. There are third-party assurance providers. There are the rating agencies. There are agencies who work on the certain services that people provide. So there are different certifications or accreditation for different roles that I can say. There are different accreditations that the organization has to have to become a third-party assurance provider. If they have to be there is a regulation now to make sure that the rating agencies are also regulated. So if there is no single institution which will be accrediting for the services that you provide on the ESG as a whole. There is nothing as such. Is there any further questions on this?
They're asking you to share best ESG practices, one or two in the organization, but not specific to any.
Best practices in terms of ESG. So I think what I can refer to, there are various, it is not fair for certain organizations who might also be performing well. So I put this in terms of without naming the organizations. So, there are various organizations that I see. I will be explaining about the ESG structure that they follow. So there are different ways in which the organization can implement an internal mechanism to drive the ESG. There are three broader concepts of driving the ESG. One is embedded ESG, where you embed your ESG portfolio as a strategy in each and every strategy making instrument of your organization. And there will be a mechanism where there will be a dedicated ESG manager or a chief sustainability driving the activity. And there are organizations where there are certain committees which takes the decision on the ESGs. So we have come across one of the organizations where there is nothing called ESG. They don't have a separate ESG department per se. So it might look like they are not, as in the outside look, it might look like they don't have a CSO, they don't have until recently they didn't had a, dedicated person who looks after ESG alone. So having said that, they had established the system in such a robust manner that they had various subcommittees. They had around 7 subcommittees, if I remember. They had a subcommittee on, supply chain. They had a subcommittee on the logistics. They had a subcommittee on the communications in terms of, how do they communicate to the customers? How do they communicate to their stakeholders? They had a separate subcommittee on the manufacturing. Basically, each of these committees were given with certain measurable KPIs, measurable targets, and had midterm and long-term targets and the action plan for that. Each and every subcommittee. All these subcommittees were presenting their performance once in a month to the management. So with this, what basically they had done is they were entirely running the ESG without even having a dedicated, manpower or dedicated department for the ESG, or without having the CSO in place. So this is one of the very great examples that I see, that it is not, ESG is not something which is handled by a department, a standalone department which sits at the corporate, which collects the data from various operational sites and compiles the data and publishes it. It is not ESG. I mean, it might, from the outside perspective, you might see their ESG report. They might be having fancy jargon words. They might have given a lot of nice pictures in the ESG report, and people might feel for a shorter duration that they are performing well in ESG. But in the long run, or in the real sense, that is not what ESG means. ESG is something which is to be incorporated in the each and every strategy making instruments in the organization. So that is something which is very important in terms of ESG. So that is what I wanted to bring upon. And there are various organizations. There is one more organization where that organization has even, it believes that they don't have an ESG in place, whereas they have all the certifications which are required to be, all the standards, certifications that fall under the E, S, and G. They have all the certifications. They have the energy management system. They have the environment management system. They have the safety management system. They have the best place to work. I mean, the great place to work. And they have SA 8000. They have all the, they have SEDEX. So basically, they have all the requirements which fall under the E, S, and G jargons or J buckets, but they don't have dedicated line or dedicated departments per se to drive these activities. So it is very easier for such organization to drive the ESG when it comes, or it will be faster for those organizations to cope up with the regulations because they already have an embedded system of ESG in their DNA. So that is something that I wanted to explain when it comes to the best practices. I mean, definitely there are best practice case studies, like there are organizations who do the best water management, there are organizations who do the best CO2 management. I mean, since ESG is something which covers everything that an organization do, so it is very difficult for us to explain as an case study to explain on what they are doing as a best practice. If there is there any other questions?
I would request the participants to unmute your audio, and then you can ask the questions, if any. The speaker has responded to all the queries in the chat box.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Should we address all the risk categories while implementing BRSR?
Not necessarily. See, the BRSR. Yeah. So to come into that question, so see, ultimately BRSR doesn't mean that you report only the good things and only the things that you have. Even the aspects that you might not be having and which you might be having as a risk, but you are not addressing it. It is very important for any ESG, framework, that you report that as well, and your action plan for, or if there is an omission of the disclosure that you are doing, it is very important that you mention it, and you mention the logic behind omission of that part of it also. And when it comes to the risk categories, it may not to address. I mean, the addressing each and everything is not something which is mandatory. Can you please elaborate? Sorry, there is one more question that has been put in the chat box on. Can you please elaborate on the CIA Sustainability Award and Green Co Award? So CIA Sustainability Award is developed based on ESG framework. It is based on a framework where people are assessed on with respect to the systems that they have and the performance that they do. And also there are different levels of the award. I mean, different. There is an Environment Domain Excellence Award. There is a Corporate Excellence Award. So the Corporate Excellence Award is the highest category where the organization can get itself assessed for the entire aspects of ESG. and all the verticals of ESG. Whereas if any organization would like to get itself assessed only for the for a part of the domain of the ESG, like for example, environment or biodiversity or CSR, people can apply for that particular this one also. Also, there's a third party assured award is what it is called. So basically, you will also get a feedback on your performance at the end of the cycle. You'll also be getting a gap assessment report. So basically, it can also help you to develop your roadmap where you will be getting a gap assessment. And when it comes to the Green Co, so Green Co has a very specific requirements. Unlike, even the ESG, CIA Sustainability Award is a, where you can, there is no specific requirements from the standard itself, but in terms of Green Co, there are specific requirements that the organization has to meet to or on specific requirement the organization will be scored upon. So you can just go through the Green Co checklist and do an internal assessment also to understand where do you fall as on Green Co rating is concerned. Or if there are organizations like us who will be helping you to cope up with both of these awards and everything. And yeah, any other questions, please?
It is one more question, but I don't know how much relevant it is. The effectiveness to check the submitted data through BRSR format and what action plan to take on the greenwashing.
Yeah, greenwashing, there is a guideline which is going to be come up now. So that's a very good question that now that there is no mechanism per se as on date to check whether the data which has been reported for now in the BRSR is credible or not. Ultimately, that is the reason why the assurance or the assessment is something which is very necessary. Third-party assurance or third-party assessment certificates which are going to be attached in line with the in addition to the reports is something which will be disclosing that it is credible enough to publish it. But having said that, there is a risk of greenwashing anyway, and there are certain regulations which is expected in very near future where the organization will be regulated out on their disclosures also. The larger claims that the organization make, people has to be very careful before they give that give that in the public disclosure. So there is a regulation which is going to regulate it. Any further queries? I would like to touch upon one thing. Since this topic of ESG, BRSR, and the recent updates, everything is, it is very larger topics. We apologize saying that we would have not covered all the topics which might be addressing each of your queries or each of your expectations. Having said that, we are open for any clarifications that you would be having on any specific topics that you might be willing to understand.
There are quite few compliments for the session, and Definitely, based on the approval of the speaker and the company, we will be uploading the session in the Chambers YouTube link. Please do watch out. Maybe in the next 1 or 2 days, we will be uploading. Thanks. And offline also, we have received many a request requesting the chamber to host a detailed workshop or maybe a half-day session. And we will definitely consider, and we will update the participants soon on the next session.
Thank you so much. Thank you, BCIC, for giving us the opportunity to talk to so many great professionals. So this also helps us to understand the challenges that the organizations are facing, organizations like yours are facing in terms of ESG implementation, which will also help us to provide better solutions and fine tune our discussions whenever we have the discussions in the next sessions or in the sessions that other speakers are going to follow. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Ravitej and Mr. Amog, for the exhaustive presentation and responding to many of the queries, almost all the queries. And definitely we would like to have at the earliest a detailed session.
Sure.
And thanks once again, sir, on behalf of the chamber. Thank you. Thanks to all the participants for joining this session, and have a nice weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you and have a nice weekend. Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you very much.